Hello and welcome to the last problem solving session, that is week 12 problem solving session for the NPTEL course on environmental impact assessment. This course is being taken by Dr. Harshit Soshan Dakra, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Architecture and Planning, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. I am Isha Rathore, PMRF and research scholar at the Department of Architecture and Planning, IIT Roorkee. So a few housekeeping rules before we begin the session. Please mute yourself for the session. If you have any questions or if you like to post the answers, you can do that in the chat box. At different points during the session, I will ask you if you have any queries. So you can then raise your hand and unmute yourself for asking questions. So the session is structured such that first we are going to look up at the highlights from each of the week, which will so from week 12, whatever key takeaways were there from each of the lecture units. We will look at those highlights. Then we will look up at assignment questions. So these are questions from the previous run of the course. So the assignment questions from the previous run of the course will be solved with their explanations. And lastly, if you received any queries from you in last week's, based on this week's content in the discussion forums, we will also address them, as well as your own queries throughout this session. Okay, so week 12 looked up at AIA case examples. So we will move on to the highlights for week 12. So week 12, we are first going to look up at lecture 56. This was the first lecture in week 12. So this was on AIA, widening the scope, that is strategic environmental assessment, also known as SEA. So we looked up at the definition and need of SEA. So according to Threvel in 2010, SEA is a process that aims to integrate environmental and sustainability considerations in strategic decision making. This is the definition of SEA. Then we looked up at the differences between SEA and EIA. So on the number of parameters, both SEA and EIA are different. So on the nature of action, SEA is more strategy, vision, plan kind of document, whereas EIA is more of constructor, operation, action plan. On the scale of impacts, SEA looks at macro, that is national, regional, and landscape, whereas EIA looks up at micro level, that is on your particular project, specific to the local conditions and the site conditions. Then the scope of impacts in SEA are broad in scale and magnitude because we are looking up at macro region, whereas in EIA, the scope of impacts is localized and specific because we are looking up at a zoomed in development project at a particular site. Then the timescale for SEA is long to medium, whereas for EIA is medium to short. The data for SEA is mainly descriptive, but also possibly quantifiable, that is, it's mappable. So, for example, you have data like existing national or regional statistical and trend data, whereas for EIA, it's more quantifiable, mappable data. Example, the data that you collect during your fieldwork, sample analysis, and local monitoring data. Then alternatives in SEA are proposed in terms of fiscal measures, economic, social, or physical strategies, technologies, spatial balance of location. Whereas EIA, there are specific alternatives which are proposed in terms of alternative locations, technologies, design, timing, mitigation effects, etc. And assessment benchmarks in SEA are sustainability and environmental criteria and objectives, whereas for EIA, it's the legal restrictions and best practice cases which we can look up. The SEA is less rigorous. It's more there's more uncertainty in SEA, whereas EIA is more rigorous and there's less uncertainty. The output from SEA is more broad, whereas EIA is more detailed. So these are the differences between SEA and EIA based on the nature of the actions, based on different parameters which we have seen from this table. Then we looked up at, again, what EIA does and what SEA does in more detail. So SEA, it allows for consideration of all alternatives. It allows steering of decisions with higher level decisions made at the PPP or public-private partnership stage, allowing EIAs to have a narrower scope and be more streamlined, whereas EIA projects are specific to development proposals and they cannot steer development towards environmentally robust areas or away from environmentally sensitive areas. So SEA is mostly broader region-based, whereas EIA is a specific project-based. Then we looked up at the tiers of SEA and AIA. So the objectives of there are 4 tiers in which SEA can be looked up. So the first tier is policy SEA, that is you're making some policies for the broader field development or things like that. Then you have plan SEA, then program SEA, and further down you have project AIA. So tier 4, that is project AIA, is where EIA comes in, whereas SEA is strategic environmental assessment, is a broader tier 1 level of assessment which is done. Okay. Then we looked up at scoping questions which are adapted from CEQ. So these are things you can ask. So what decisions need to be made now and in the future regarding the PPP being proposed, or public-private partnership? PPP is public-private partnership model. And what are the meaningful decision points from proposal to implementation, and where are the most effective points in that continuum to address the potential for effects? Then what are the appropriate geographic, spatial, and time frame temporal limits for this SEA? Is it necessary to analyze the particular effects of a proposed action at a broader scale to facilitate analysis and or decision making at a more defined or tiered level? And is an SEA the best way to do it? How long will the SEA continue to provide a relevant framework for tiering subsequent actions, and what factors may result in the need to supplement or refresh the review? Are there any other stakeholders that may provide meaningful input during the SEA? So these are some questions which are asked during scoping for SEA. Then this was the SEA steps for development of local plans. So based on, there are 5 stages which are there. So for the local plan preparation, so first stage is setting the context and objectives, establishing the baseline and deciding on the scope. So you first identify what are the relevant policies, plans, and programs, collect baseline data or information, identify which issues and problems need to be highlighted, and develop an appraisal framework, sustainability appraisal framework for that, and consult the consultation bodies on the scope of this appraisal report. So that is stage 1. Then the next stage is to develop and refine alternatives and assessing effects. So again, what objectives you test the objectives against which against your appraisal report. Then you develop local action plan options, including reasonable alternatives. Evaluate the likely effects of the local plan and alternatives, and consider ways of mitigating adverse effects and maximizing beneficial effects, and propose measures to monitor the significant effects of implementing the local plan. Then in stage 3, we prepare the sustainability appraisal report. From there, we go on to stage 4, which is seek representation on the sustainability appraisal report from consultation bodies and the public. So different stakeholders giving their views on it. And the final stage is post-adoption reporting and monitoring. So you prepare and publish the post-adoption statement, monitor the significant effects of implementing the local plan, and respond to adverse effects. So similar to AIA, all of these stages are there in AIA as well, but the scope of SEA is slightly wider or at a macro level. So the scope of SEA becomes more than what we do for AIA. So we have the in legislations, we have the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM. So this is the bureau. It was originally known as Bureau of Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation and Enforcement. And prior to that, it was known as Minerals Management Service. So they published this report for the Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program. So this was they prepared this impact statement to assess the environmental, social, and economic impacts associated with the program. Then we looked up at the types of plans which are required for SEA in China. So there are 3 types of plans. So category 1 plans are land use plans, plans for exploration, use, and development in areas, watersheds and coastal areas. Category B are special plans for industry, agriculture, pasturage, forestry, energy, water management, transport, urban construction, tourism, and exploration of natural resources. Category C are guidance plans for the category B plans, that is those which establish development strategies for the special plans. So these are the 3 category of plans which were discussed, particular to China. Then for determining SEA effectiveness, so it's mostly focused on whether appropriate legislation is placed in that particular country. So there's contextual effectiveness and whether SEA reports cover particular topics. So there, whether there is procedural effectiveness also. Then increasing the emphasis on ensuring good outcomes on the ground. For SEA, we also have wider learning through SEA because we are looking up at a larger macro scale, and there's improved public participation in plan making through SEA. So for planning authorities, proactively responding to SEA requirements can lead to operational benefits such as more robust plans that are less likely to be challenged and more likely to be smoothly implemented. For public, there's increased opportunity to scrutinize and influence decision making that can lead to empowerment and increased democracy, and that can help to rebalance distributional injustices. Politically, SEA can help to determine which issues are important and must be explicitly considered in decision making. So, based on three perspectives, that is your planning authorities, public, and political parties, SEA effectiveness can be uh, assessed. Then we move on to the next chapter in this week, so which was lecture 57. So this was on EIA reporting and review of EIA quality. So in this chapter, in this lecture, we looked up at EIA reporting, the content and purpose. So how we present the EIA report. So we have already looked up at the important steps in the EIA process. So first we have the screening, then we have scoping, identification of impacts, then mitigation measures, consultation, and then presentation or review of the EIS report. So this is the stage which we are referring to now. And then later on, we have the post-decision monitoring and audit measures. So the general structure of an EIA document is such that you have different sections or different chapters in an EIA report. So first is your introduction, which introduces the purpose of the report, the basic parameters of the report, identification of project and what authorities were involved, a brief description of the nature, size, and location of the project, and the importance of that project in that country or region, and the scope of study, whether there were some limitations or something like that. So that is the first chapter, introduction. Then you have project description, where you give a detailed description of the project study areas and things like that, the type of project, need of project, location, then size and magnitude of operation, proposed schedule, technology and other things, all methods and all of these things which will identify. That is your project description. Then the description of environment, what is your study area, what components are there, what environmental parameters are there which needs to be assessed and things like that. And if you can put them on base maps and things. So that is description of environment. We'll look up at all of these sections in detail also following up. Then we have the associated environmental impacts and mitigation measures, where you give your mitigation measures and you identify what impacts on the project are felt on what environmental parameters and what mitigation measures can be proposed. Again, what is the scale of those impacts, type of impacts, and significance of those impacts. All of these things are identified. Then the analysis of alternatives. So then description of each alternative or mitigation measure which is being suggested, their summary, and the selection of alternatives based on whatever was available. Then your environmental monitoring plan, which gives the monitoring measures, reporting schedules, data analysis, locations, and things like that. Then additional studies, if for your particular project you had to undertake any other additional study, like if you did any social impact assessment, or if you have a restoration and rehabilitation kind of project, so that study, those things can be then included as additional sections. And then lastly, we have the project benefits, the environmental cost benefit analysis, environmental management plan, EMP, and finally the summary and conclusions and the disclosure of the consultants who are engaged. So a summary of all those consultants who have prepared this report and what component was prepared by which agency. So this is the general structure of the IA document. So first we look up at the summary. So the summary of EIA report, it's condensed so that you can read whatever is presented briefly in that report before going into the detailed study, whatever was done. So in the brief summary of the EIA report, you have project description, the description of the environment, anticipated environmental impacts and mitigation measures, environmental monitoring program, additional studies, project benefits, and environmental management plan. So briefly on all of these sections which we saw in the previous slide, all of a few statements are mentioned. The key statements or key highlights are mentioned. Uh, we have now looked up at all of these in detail as well. Okay. So typically an EIA report includes the following terms. So you have an executive or non-technical summary. So this is what executives study from different places. So you include everything which is in your report in a very concise, short manner. That is the key takeaways from each of these sections can be included in executive summary. So it includes everything, but only the most important things, so that people who do not have very technical knowledge of each of these sections or each of these understanding can still figure out what is in that report. Then you also have the statement of the need for doing EIA. What are the objectives of the EIA, and whether this proposal is feasible or not. Then you have reference to applicable legislative, regulatory, and policy frameworks. So in that particular region where the project is to be developed, what legislative guidelines or laws are there which needs to be followed, what are the benchmarks which needs to be met. All of these are presented and shown that these are being met by the project development. The description of the proposal and how it will be implemented. So what are the stages of the development? What all needs to be constructed? At what timeline will it be constructed? How much area will it be constructed over? All of those descriptions of the proposal is also given along with that schedule, and the comparison of the proposal and the alternatives to it, and what impacts are coming because of that development and how they are being addressed. So this is what typically an EIA report includes. So you have the description of the project setting, description of baseline conditions and trends, uh, the review of the public consultation process, consideration of the main impacts likely to result from the proposal, evaluation of the significance of the residual impacts, and environmental management plan, appendices which contain supporting technical information like methods, list of reference, etc. So all of the data which you have collected can be put in appendixes to support your statements. Then the executive summary, the first thing which is given is the executive summary after your uh, the first thing after your description, basically the introduction. So the executive summary includes the proposal and its setting, terms of reference for the EIA, results of public consultations, alternatives which are considered, major impacts and their significance, proposed mitigation measures, environmental management plan, and other critical methods. So all of the information in the EIA report is concised and presented in this executive summary in a non-technical tone. Then for legal and policy frameworks, you include the brief description of legal and policy frameworks, which are applicable to a particular project and in that particular area. The relevant aspects of EIA procedures can be cited. Terms of reference for the EIA and the copy of the complete terms of reference should be appended where appropriate. So this is what is included in the legal and policy framework part. Then for baseline information, we include the spatial and temporal boundaries, biophysical land use and socioeconomic conditions, major trends and anticipated future conditions, should the proposal not go ahead, and environmentally sensitive areas and valued resources if any of them are present in your site. This is what is included in baseline information. This is just a general overview of what falls under each of these information. Again, the reports are more detailed, and we will see examples of that in the last 3 lectures. So for the statement of the nature, scope, and results of public consultation, on public consultations, you include the identification of the interested and affected public. So you identify all of these stakeholders. Then the methods used to inform and involve stakeholders in the decision making, the analysis of their views and concerns which were expressed in different consultation rounds, and how these have been taken into account in the final EIA reporting, and the outstanding issues and matters that need to be resolved. So all of this is included in the public consultation section. Then, so for reporting the impacts, you identify the impact types on different environmental parameters. You present them in a table, and then you identify the impacts based on nature, magnitude, extent, timing, duration, reversibility, likelihood, significance. So on all of these impact parameters, you identify the impacts on each of the things which are like your flora, fauna, air quality, water quality, geomorphological conditions, and things like that. On all of these environmental parameters, you identify what type of impacts are being faced and in greater detail what these impacts mean. Okay. So then for the section where we write what is the purpose of doing EIA. So purpose is to establish if the information in an EIA report is sufficient for decision making. So the key objectives are to review the quality of the EIA report, take account of the public comment or their sentiment, and determine if that information is sufficient and identify if there are any deficiencies that need to be corrected. So this report, when it is submitted to the agencies, are reviewed, and if they find any deficiencies, they can revert it back saying you need to include something on this particular environmental parameter and then resubmit. If they accept it, then it will go forward and you can go forward with your development plan. But if it does not get approved, then you need to include those changes which are being suggested by the EIA review committee, and you need to include them and resubmit. So EIA review, what is considered in the review process? So they see whether there's compliance with the terms of reference, whether the information which is presented in the EIA report is correct and technically sound, whether it takes into account all of the public comments and different rounds of consultations and how they have been incorporated in EIA in their report and in their decision making, whether there is complete and satisfactory statements of key findings, if the information is clear and understandable, and the information is sufficient for decision making. So these are the key aspects which the EIA review committee look for in the EIA reports. Then the EIA review can be two types. It can be internal review or it can be external review. In the internal review is low. The advantages is to have low. It works with low operating costs, but it lacks rigor and transparency. Often there is no documentation of the results, whereas the external review is done by independent experts who check on the EIA quality, and this is more rigorous and transparent, and the report the final results from this are in the form of the publication of the review report or the EIA report, and there is sufficient there is like they assess the EIA report based on the sufficiency or deficiency, whether the information is sufficient or not for decision making, or if they missed any key component, then what key component was missed will be sent back to them to work on, and then they have to resubmit. So the process is more transparent and rigorous in the external review. Then the review procedure can include environmental agencies, independent panels or mediators, standing commission, interagency committee, planning authority. So people from these agencies can be included in the EIA review committee, and their regulations or their legislative guidelines needs to be followed, and they will check that more scrutiny wise. So for EIA review, steps to good practice was also discussed. So you need to set the scale of the review, select the reviewers, use public input, identify review criteria, carry out that review, determine remedial options, and publish the review report. The following can be used in terms of priority. So terms of reference, EIA report of comparable proposals, other guidance including EIA requirements, guidelines and criteria, principles of EIA good practice, knowledge of the project and typical impacts. So from other information, all of this information can be put in different sources. So for carrying out the EIA review, the process or the approach is a four-step process. So step one is identifying the deficiencies in your in the review, whether some environmental parameter is missed, if there was let's say a dam project, whether there was resettlement and rehabilitation section has been included or not. So you identify if any key parameter is missed in the EIA report. So first is to identify the deficiencies if there are any. Step 2 is to focus on critical shortcomings. If the methods used for performing collecting the data for the particular environmental parameter are not correct, or the data is insufficient, so those are critical shortcomings in the EIA report. So you focus on that, and you revert back to the agencies which have prepared the EIA report to include these sections or to revise them. Step 3 is to recommend remedial measures. So if you feel that if the expert committee feels that any mitigation measure can be replaced with a more better remedial measure, then that can also be recommended. So third step is recommendation. And fourth step is advice on implications for decision making. So these are the four steps which are used for AIA review, or how the review committee go about uh, how the review committee go about the EIA review process. The EIA review methods in the EIA report can be general checklist, project specific checklist, review packages, expert and accredited reviewers, public hearings, effectiveness review framework. So we have looked up at all of these different methods and different environmental parameters we have seen in different sections or in different lectures so far. Then we also have rating scale for EIA review. So from A to F, we have the rating scale. So A is generally well performed, not important tasks. Like no important tasks have been left incomplete. Whereas towards the F end, you have very unsatisfactory, and important tasks have been poorly done or not attempted. Whereas NA is not applicable. That is, a review topic is not applicable in the context of the project. So this is the rating scale, which was also discussed. So the procedure for the IA review is uh, something which was also discussed in lecture 57. So the first is whether the complete information is provided or not. The second is then you move forward and see if the EIA report has followed the correct layout and all of the content is present, which has been stated in the report. So then we have review area. So review area 1 is a description of development and local environment and baseline conditions. All of the information in this particular section has been presented and is sufficient for making decisions. Review 2 is identification, analysis, and assessment of impacts. Whether all the impacts on all the environmental parameters have been assessed, whether the impacts studied have used correct methods, and there are tangible outcomes coming out of it, and all the impacts have been studied and in detail. So that is review 2. Then review 3 is alternatives and mitigations, whether alternatives and mitigations have been proposed for each of the impacts which were identified in review 2, and they have been addressed correctly and sensitively. And review 4 is the communication of results, how stakeholders are involved in they were involved and there were public consultations, all of those things have happened. So this is the four categories on which this review report is being assessed. And then the committee decides whether the EIA report has met the minimum standards. So if not, then it will go back to the agency or the project developer for revision. If it has met, then you check whether it is in general compliance with all of the other agency data and things like that. So if not, then again it's sent for revision. If yes, then you move on and you give your uh, feedbacks for further study or impact monitoring and management by the proponent or the government. You assign a rating to that report as a whole and state any conditions which the project proponent has to meet if it has to meet anything. So this is the general process. This is just an example of how they assess and how they give ratings. So each review wise, they have certain questions and they can use them for rating. So based on the scale of A to F. Okay. Then for the Indian context, we looked up at the review of EIS report and EIA report. So this review report is there's a detailed scrutiny by the expert appraisal committee or the state level expert appraisal committee. So it looks up at the application and other documents like the final EIA report. So it will look up at all of the sanctions which they were required to get from the different ministries, if you remember, the CPCB, the Forest Ministry of Forest and Environment and Climate Change, Airport Authority, and all of those documents or sanctions which they initially need to get, whether all of those documents are there. Then whether public consultation studies were carried out, what were the proceedings and what were the outcomes, all of those advertisements or notifications for the public consultation meetings. All of those documents need to be there. And it shall be made by the expert appraisal committee to the central government or the state level expert appraisal committee to the state level environment impact assessment authority. So these are the agencies which deal with the AIA reports, which are submitted in the Indian context. So again, the contents are similar. So project site description, completeness and authenticity of baseline data, citing of proper references, consistency of values of environmental parameters, mitigation measures, incorporation of inputs from public hearings, effectiveness and consistency of the proposed environmental monitoring plan, and identification of hazard and quantification of risk assessment. So these are what the IA report is assessed on in the Indian context. Then some aspects for consideration for doing a comprehensive AIA review. So performance of scoping, accuracy of impact prediction, the criteria which was used to evaluate significance, comparison of alternatives from previous studies or reference studies, the effectiveness of proposed mitigation measures from, again, similar scale studies or developments, requirements for monitoring and impact management, and modes of public and stakeholder involvement. So these are few aspects which are considered to give a evaluation of a comprehensive or a very well detailed rating A kind of EIA review study. Then for the similar, this is the Indian context is also similar for doing the how the review is carried out to identify the deficiencies in the report. You focus on any critical shortcomings and separate any of the crucial deficiencies. And then step 3, you have the recommendations on if and how this report can be made better. So again, review methods are similar uh, in the Indian context as well. So you have the general checklists, the project-specific checklists and guidelines, AIA review frameworks and packages, expert and accredited reviewers, public hearings, and comprehensive review of the AIA process. These are the methods. Then the rating is also similar. You have A to F, from excellent to no opinion. And so how is the quality of a EIA report assessed? So one is in terms of consistency, that is the consistency with the terms of reference and the process followed. So for all of the environmental parameters, there's a similar level of detailed study which is carried out. And the report is consistent and speaking the same thing from chapter 1 to the last chapter in summary conclusions. So they are consistent in their results and reporting. The second is whether the information is complete, so that decisions can be made, proper decisions can be made. Whether the information is suitable, that is, you collected the right sort of information for making those decisions. Whether it is understandable, that is, the data analysis has been done such that the key elements out of that data has been stated in very simple language or simple statement, so that anybody reading that report can make out that this is what this data means. Whether the information is reliable, that is, it meets established professional and disciplinary standards, that is, you can trust the data which has been collected, or whether the statements made in that report are reliable or trustworthy. Whether the information is defensible, that is, risks and impacts are qualified as to proposal uncertainties, and whether this information is actionable, that is, you're given clear basis for all the choices or selection of mitigation measures and identification of impacts. All of these things have been done in a very reasonable or realistic way that it can be implemented also. So whether it is actionable. Okay. So this is just an example of how these statements are written for different sections. So this was also something which was discussed in this lecture. So for different things, these statements are given. So next we look up at the next lectures look up at the case study. So lecture 58 looks up at AIA case study for the Mumbai Metro Line 3, which is the Kolaba Bandra SEEP Z. So this is Metro Line 3. So this is the actual environmental impact assessment report. So you see this is updated, which means it has been revised after the EIA report. This was done in 2016. These are the different agencies which have worked on this report. This is the project developer or the Mumbai Metro Line 3 project developer, basically. Uh, so this is the content which is given. So you see all of the sections which we have looked up at. So first is the executive summary, then introduction, the salient features or description of the project, the environmental baseline data, negative environmental impacts, positive environmental impacts, environmental management plan, disaster management plan, public consultation, environmental monitoring plan, cost estimates, and conclusions. So they have included the sections which were relevant for them. So first, so these are all sections from the report which I have taken up and which was discussed in lecture 58 as well. So the first thing is they have put maps identifying what is going to be the route of the Metro Line 3, what will be the stop points and where all it will meet. Then you have the purpose of the project and the funding agency. So the purpose is to decongest the existing public transport systems and increase mobility across the regions. So the Mumbai Metro Rail Corporation, MMRC, through MMRC commissioned the services of rights to develop a DPR, an environmental or social impact assessment study for the corridor of Kolaba, Bandra, SEEPZ, covering total length of 33.5 kilometers. So they have identified the purpose of the project, that is to decongest the existing transport system and increase mobility from this region to this region. Then they have identified the funding agency. So the funding agency, they are getting the funds from Japan International Cooperation Agency, that is JICA, Zika. And so now, because they are taking the funds from this Zika, they have to meet whatever guidelines are there for Zika. So the scope of the study is framed as per the Zika guidelines for environmental and social considerations of 2011. So they have used their guidelines because they are taking funds from them. The support will be submitted to Zika as well, stating that their funds have been utilized, and this is the uh, environmental impact study which is coming out of the project which they are funding. So this is the purpose of the project and funding agencies they have identified. Then these are the salient features of the project. See, they have identified what is going to be the design speed of this metro line. So if the metro is running on this, the speed is this much. What is the scheduled speed? Which is the power department? How many substations are there? What is the capacity of each coach units? How is the signaling and train control done? Fare collection, depot location, train operation, headway, and all of these things which are relevant for this project information. So that is mentioned. Then they have identified the objectives and scope of the study. So objective is to facilitate the Mumbai Metropolitan Regional Development Authority, MMRC, in the preparation of AIA report as per requirement of regulatory and funding agency. The scope of AIA includes the impacts resulting from the different stages of construction. So pre-construction, construction and operation phases of Line 1 Metro Corridor, depot and substations. The MMRC has a plan to get funds from Japan International Cooperation Agency, Zika, for the construction of this particular project. Okay. Then there are certain other things. So they are making all of these, making a note to what all legislative frameworks they are following. So as per the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Government of India, notification of 14 September 2006 and its amendment, it enlists projects and schedules that require environment clearance. However, as per the said notification, a metro project does not require environmental clearance from Ministry of Environment and Forest. So the scope of the study is framed as per Zika guidelines for environmental and social considerations. So because metro project does not require an EIA to be done because it's towards the it's not included in the schedule lists of project types for which environmental impact clearance is required. So they're using the Zika guidelines for performing the EIA study. Okay, and similar things. So all of these important information, they need to include it in the introduction section and the objectives and uh, aim of the EIA study. Then in the scopes, they have identified the scope of different agencies and what data and everything needs to be collected. So they have identified that they need to do different surveys, which include identification of sensitive environment and social receptors. They need to do consultation with local community and other key stakeholders to understand their perception and expectations on this project. They need to collect information on forestry, flora, fauna, natural habitat, species, through ecological surveys of the study area, collection of additional secondary environmental, social, and demographic information. So all of these things which they feel are required for the successful completion or to have a complete understanding for any decision making, they list it as the scope of the study. So different plans which they need to prepare. So construction labor management plan, occupational health and safety plan, emergency response plan, traffic management plans, all of that they list. Then what are the limitations? So the impact assessment study for the proposed project is largely based on available project information, discussion with local community and other stakeholders, and observations from various surveys and investigations undertaken in the study area. And the professional judgment and subjective interpretation of facts has been applied for this study. So they basically list down whatever is the scope, what is the limitations of the studies, what additional things they are doing. Then, because they are following the Zika guidelines, so Zika has 3 categories. So they have to take into account what category their they are doing the EIA report according to, based on what is apt for this. Then for legal framework, they've given a table in which they identify all the laws, regulations, or guidelines, what this particular law is saying, whether it's applicable to this particular project development, and what is the reason for applicability, and who is the implementing or responsible agency. So then these agencies will also have become stakeholders in this project development. They will their say will also be included. So the Environmental EPA Act 1986, the EIA notification, the Water Prevention and Water Act. So whether they are applicable, all of these different acts they have identified and put it in that table. Then clearance requirements. So for uh, if they have to do require any clearance or approval, they have identified like for permission for cutting of trees. So they need approval from the tree authority. This is the responsibility of which agency. So things like that they identify. The project stage also they identify. Then different parameters, all of these different permissions, who is responsible and who will do this thing. So all of these clearance requirements is also put. Then the approach and methodology. So what is their approach? How they are going to do different impact assessment. So impacts assessed for various phases of project cycle, namely impacts due to project location, due to project design, project construction, and project operation. So they have divided all the impacts based on these 4 categories. Then they have a list of documents which were reviewed based on the employer requirements. So detailed project report, EIA report, environmental and social management plan, environmental baseline monitoring plan, and addendum to environmental and social management plan. So these are again things which are there in the report itself. Then they have also identified what are the potential ecological impacts of the project. So they have taken permission for removal of trees, the loss or degradation of biodiversity, loss or degradation of soil. These are ecological impacts only. They have listed all of those impacts in terms of magnitude, how much area was acquisited, how much area was acquired basically, the impact on structure and all of those different things. So everything is put in quantitative term based out of all these surveys and methods which they have used to collect data. Then they also did this historical assessment because there were monuments within the vicinity of this line 3. So they have identified which monuments were there, what is the distance from this metro line, what are the sensitive receptors. So sensitive receptors are places like your educational institutions which might be disturbed because of the construction and running of these activities of this project development. So hospitals, what distance it is in, and things like that. So all of this is identified. Then negative environmental impacts with uh, the data which is there. So decrease in oxygen production, this much kg is the decrease in oxygen production because of all the trees which they have cut. Increase in CO2, again in quantities, total number of trees which were cut. Negative environmental impacts on your different environmental parameters. Again, this will be then detailed. So now they have identified, because they have done impacts based on the four categories, project location, and all of those things. So now they are identifying these impacts according to that. So impacts due to project location, you will have project affected people, change of land use, loss of trees or forest, utility or drainage problems, impact on historical and cultural monuments, and impact on local transport facilities. So these are impacts because of project location, which they have identified. They have written all of these paragraphs for it as well, impacts and what are these impacts. Then impacts on mangroves also they have put. All of these things are there in the report. Then the next was the impacts due to project design. So considered impacts due to project design are platform inlets and outlets, ventilation, lighting, metro station refuse, and this due to earthquake. So all of this they have identified. Due to project construction, you have soil erosion, traffic diversion, risk of existing buildings, impact of proposed road improvement, dust generation, increased water demand, air pollution, noise pollution, vibration impacts. So all of this they have identified for their particular project in the project construction stage. Then last is the impact due to project operation. So you will have negative impacts like noise pollution, vibration impact due to train, water supply and sanitation at stations, disposal and sanitation, electromagnetic interference. So this was identified. And then impacts because the in the objective they have stated that we are looking up at impacts because of the running of the development of the metro line, depot, and the stop points as well. So they have put impacts because of depot constructions as well. Then we also look up at positive environmental impact. So any positive impact, if it is coming out of this project, has also been listed. So you have employment opportunities, benefit to economy, mobility, safety, traffic congestion reduction, reduction in the number of vehicle trips on the road, less fuel consumption, reduce air pollution, carbon dioxide reduction, reduction in number of buses, saving in road infrastructure, and traffic noise reduction. So these are the positive environmental impacts. Then mitigation measures which they have identified. So compensatory afforestation, because they cut trees, they are doing compensatory afforestation for it. Then construction material management, labor camps, energy management, hazardous waste management, environmental sanitation. So all of these they are doing, etc. for the mitigation measures. Next, we look up at lecture 59, which looked up at AIA case studies, development of water aerodrome, Andaman and Nicobar. So this is part one, whereas lecture 60 is part two. So this is the report which is prepared. The project proponent or developer is the Andaman and Nicobar Administration, Directorate of Civil Aviation. The consultant is Enviro Resources. The principal consultant is Feedback Infra, and Environmental Laboratories Envirotech Services. So they have given their declaration as well, which is signed by the owner or proprietor. Then they have given the executive summary, which includes all of the different sections in a short, concise, non-technical manner, which includes your project schedule, resource, onshore facilities, offshore facilities, etc. Then they have given environmental sensitive places, which are within 15 kilometers of this proposed development. They have identified all of those uh, and the distance. Then the objectives and scope of EIA study have also been presented. The terms of reference have been presented in chapter 1. Then the need of project is highlighted. Methodology is highlighted, what data is being collected, where it is being collected. Then examples, how sampling, what data is being collected, how many stations are there, how many parameters of this data are collected, what is the frequency of collection. All of this quantitative information is presented. Then for similarly for this is for water, then this is for air data which they are collecting, the methods which they are using, then again methods and what satellite data they are using and things like that they have put. For the ecological sensitive site, what is the key element which is being affected, whether it is being affected or not, what location, what species are getting affected, in what direction it is, and things like that. Then for different environmental parameters, they have given the impacts based on the different phases of development, what method they have used, what sources they have used for data collection, and how they have predicted those impacts. If they have used any computation models, then what are the options which they have used? What are the default assumptions they have considered? What are the values, or what is the grid size and things they have considered? What equations and what algorithm they have used? And what was the procedure? All of this has needs to be included, and they have included that in their AIA report. Then the mitigation measures which they have presented, all of this you can refer back to this lecture for that. Then additional impacts for different components because of what development and what is the impact and what is the proposed mitigation measure. In a table format they have given for different things. So like for emissions, emissions from fuel consumption, from dust emissions, these unchecked emissions can lead to increase in CO2, CO gases. Then it can be ensured that vehicles and machinery have given certifications and things like that. So mitigation measures also they have included in the table format. Similarly, for a different construction stage, for construction operational phase, they have given for the aquatic environment. Okay. Then they've also done the socio-economic assessment for their project. What are the positive impacts, negative impacts, then mitigation measures during the operational phase, what they need to consider. Then they have the environmental monitoring program, which says what data needs to be monitored after the construction and how it will be collected at different stages during construction, during operation, and post construction. Then what will be the frequency, what will be the parameters, what is the associated cost, and at what locations. So all of this is given during different stages. Then you have what agency did what. Then under additional studies, they have done the public consultation. So they identify what letter number stated that there's going to be a public consultation hearing, and how many people attended, what date it was there, who all were there, and at what place it was conducted. And then their issues or their statements were included in a tabular format. Then because this area is also in an hazard prone area, so they also did this risk assessment study. So the method which they adopted, the disaster categories, then disasters, different disasters, and things like that. So they have included all of that. What locations are going to be most affected? Under tsunami, what tsunami studies they have done, like what is the vulnerability and impact assessment for the tsunami to happen. Then they have another chapter on project benefits, positive impacts, and then finally they have the cost benefit analysis and environmental management plan. And lastly, they have the organizations and which agency did what. So under the environmental management plan, they have the environmental components, what was the budget which was allocated, what is going to be the recurring expenditure after post-construction, which they need to do the monitoring studies for, how this monitoring studies are being carried out. Then lastly, they have the summary and conclusions. Okay, so this was all which was discussed in week 12. So if you have any queries, you can just unmute and ask. Okay, so if there are no queries, we will go on to the question and answers section of this session. So you can put your answers in the chat box. I will maybe moderate it. Okay. So the first question is, which of the following properties define strategic environmental assessment, or SEA? A, scale of impact is national, regional, and landscape. B, scope of impact is localized and specific. C, detailed output, or D, short-term timescale. Okay, so we looked up at SEA, Strategic Environmental Assessment, in lecture 56. And we looked up at the difference between SEA and EIA as well. Okay, so the correct answer is A, that is the scale of impact is national, regional, and landscape for SEA, whereas the scope is broad in scale and magnitude. It's not localized and specific. EIA, the scope is localized and specific. The output is more broad, whereas there's a detailed output in EIA, and the time scale is medium to long term for SEA. So the correct answer is A, that is scale of impact is national, regional, and landscape for strategic environmental assessment. So moving on to the next question. Label the diagram in correct order of strategic environmental assessment SEA. So we have different tiers. So tier 1 is P, tier 2 is Q, and tier 4 is R. So you need to identify what is P, Q, and R, whether it is project SEA, plan SEA, or policy SEA. So this is again from the lecture 56 where we look up at SEA. So the correct answer is C, that is P was policy SEA, that is tier 1. Then Q is plan SEA, which is tier 2. Tier 3 is program SEA, and tier 4, which is R, is project SEA. So the correct answer is C, that is P is policy SEA, Q is plan SEA, and R is project EIA. Okay. So moving on to the next question. State true or false, AIA for the project Mumbai Metro Line 3 Kolaba Bandra SEEPZ was prepared because of the requirement of the International Funding Agency (ZICA), Japan International Cooperation Agency. Is this statement true or false? Okay, so this statement is true. So the funding agency for the Mumbai Metro Line 3 Kolaba Bandra SEEPZ, they did AIA because they took funding from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, because under the notification of Government of India, a metro project does not require AIA, environmental clearance from MOEF. So they took the scope of the study was framed as per the ZICA guidelines for environmental and social considerations. Okay, so the correct answer is A, that is the given statement is true. Moving on to the next question. A separate report for social impact assessment for Mumbai Metro Corridor, Kolaba Bandra SEEPZ was prepared. Is the statement true or false? Okay, so the statement is true. There was a separate report which was prepared for social impact assessment, which was volume 1 for the Mumbai Metro corridor. And this was prepared in December 2020, whereas the original updated report for AIA was 2016 December. So the given statement is true. So A is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. State true or false. The water aerodrome projects come under the purview of EIA as per the EIA notification of 2006. Is this statement true or false? Okay, so this statement is false as per the environmental impact assessment notification. So there are different categories. So airports are listed under category A, but there's no Waterdrome is not a listed project or activity in the schedule of EIA notifications and its amendments. But for this particular water aerodrome project in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the commission it felt that they need to do a EIA report. They need to do EIA for this particular kind of project. But water aerodrome projects do not come under the purview of EIA as per EIA notification of 2006. So the given statement is false. So B is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. State true or false, considering the water aerodrome are just emerging in the country as a new mode of transport involving sea or river fronts and its likely impacts on water, air, and aquatic biodiversity, including flora and fauna, the EAC has taken a view to follow the EC process as per category A of item 7A, airports, of the schedule to the EIA notification 2006, and accordingly, the TOR was recommended by EAC for the project development of water aerodrome Andaman and Nicobar. Is this statement true or false? Okay, so this statement is true because as per the EIA notification of 2006, there is no EIA notification under the schedule of projects for which EIA needs to be done. There's no category or activity for water aerodrome. But however, the committee felt that they need to do an EIA because of this emerging kind of project which is coming up. And they went on to prepare the EIA report for this. So the given statement is true. So A is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. Choose the correct stages for strategic environmental assessment SEA for local plans. One stage, setting the context and objectives, establishing the baseline and deciding on the scope. Second is deals with developing and refining alternatives and assessing effects. So what all choices you have in terms of alternatives. Third is deals with preparing the sustainability appraisal report. And fourth is deals with representation on sustainability appraisal report for public consultation and then post-adaptation reporting and monitoring. So what is the correct order from 1 to 4 in the options which are given from A to D? Okay, so the correct answer is B. That is all four are the different stages which are considered. So for stage one is selecting the context and objectives. So one is correct. Then stage B is developing and refining alternatives and assessing effects. So that is stage second option is also correct. Then stage three is preparing the sustainability appraisal report. So third is also correct. And stage D is seeking representation on the sustainability appraisal report from public consultation. So four is also correct. So B, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. State true or false. The key difference between strategic environmental assessment SEA and EIA is that SEA is a firm and solid construction and operational action, whereas EIA is a strategy, vision, plan, and a framework. Is the statement true or false? Okay, so the statement is false. The statements have been inverted. That is, SEA is actually uh, a strategy, vision, and plan framework, whereas EIA is for construction and operational action. So the given statement is false. So B is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. State true or false. Strategic environmental assessments, SEA, allows consideration of all and maximum alternatives. SEA allows also tiering of decisions at different levels with higher level decisions made for policy programs and plans. Is this statement true or false? Okay, so the given statement is true. We have seen the tiers of SEA and it allows for the consideration of all and maximum alternatives. So tier 1, we look up at policies, tier 2 is plan, and tier 3 is program SEA, whereas tier 4 is your project specific EIA. So the given statement is true. So A is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question, state true or false. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, prepared programmatic environmental impact statement, BEIS, to assess the environmental social impacts associated with the Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program, 2012 to 2017. Is the statement true or false? Okay, so the given statement is true. So this report was prepared by the statement was prepared by the Bureau of Ocean Energy and Management, and it's titled The Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program of 2012 and 17. So the given statement is true. So A is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. State true or false. Strategic Environmental Assessments, SCA, was initiated in USA in 1970. Is the statement true or false? Okay, so the given statement is true. SEA was initiated in USA in 1970. So A is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. Choose the components which EIA reports includes. First, executive or non-technical summary, and which would probably be used for the public communication document. So you see the importance of the executive or the non-technical summary. Two, statements for the need of an objective of the proposal. Three, reference to applicable legislative, regulatory, and policy framework. And four, description of the proposal and how it will be implemented. So which of these components are included in AIA report? Okay, so the correct answer is D. That is all four are included in the IA report. So you have the executive or non-technical summary. You have statements for the need of the proposal or the objectives of the study, the references to applicable legislative, regulatory, and policy frameworks, and the description of the project and how it will be implemented. So D, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. Choose the key aspects to be included for baseline information for the AIA report from below. 1, spatial and temporal boundaries. 2, biophysical land use. 3, socioeconomic conditions, the major trends. And 4, anticipated future conditions, environmentally sensitive areas. So these are key aspects which needs to be included for the baseline information for AIA report. Okay, so the correct answer is C, that is 1, 2, 3, 4. All the aspects which are mentioned in the options are included in the preparation of baseline information for AIA report. So you have the spatial and temporal boundaries, biophysical land use, socioeconomic conditions and the major trends, and the anticipated future conditions and environmentally sensitive areas. Okay, so C, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. So choose the objectives of the study for Mumbai Metro Rail Corporation project. So one EIA document is to facilitate MMRDA, which is Mumbai Metropolitan Regional Development Authority, in preparation of AIA report as per the requirement of regulatory and funding agency. 2, the scope of EIA, which includes the impact resulting from all the phases of construction, pre-construction, construction operation phases of this metro corridor, and whatever ancillary functions, depot and substations. And 3, MMRC has planned to get funding from Japan International Cooperation Agency for construction on metro Mumbai Metro line. So which of these statements are the objectives of the study? So the correct answers D, that is 1, 2, and 3. All of these are included in the objectives and scope of the study for the Mumbai Metro Rail Corporation project. Okay. So moving on to the next question. Choose the impacts due to project design for the case study of Mumbai Metro Line 3 proposed to run from Kolaba, Bandra to Seeps. First is platform inlets and outlets. Second, ventilation and lighting. Third, noise pollution. And fourth, vibration impact due to train. So we are looking at impacts due to project design specific. Okay, so the correct answer is A, that is 1 and 2 only. So impacts due to project design, as in the case study of Mumbai Metro Line 3, were the project inlets and outlets, ventilation and lighting, so 1 and 2. And other impacts due to project design were the metro station refuse and the risk due to earthquake. Whereas the options 3 and 4 are related to the project operation instead of project design. Okay, so the correct answer is A, that is 1 and 2 only. Moving on to the next question. So choose the impacts due to project operation for the case study of Mumbai Metro Line 3 proposed to run from Kolaba Bandra to Seeps. So first is water supply and sanitation. Second, refuse disposal and sanitation. 3, electromagnetic interference. 4, metro station reuse. And 5th, risk due to earthquake. Okay, so the correct answer is A, that is 1, 2, and 3 only. So impacts due to project operations are 1, on water supply and sanitation at stations. Then 3, refuse disposal and sanitation at stations. 3, electromagnetic interference, whereas the other impacts due to project operation are noise pollution and vibration impacts due to train. Okay, so the correct answer is A, that is 1, 2, and 3 only. Moving on to the next question. State true or false. Mumbai Metro Rail Corporation, MMRC, commissioned the services of rights to prepare the DPR and environmental, social, or impact assessment study for the corridor of Kolaba Bandra Seeps, covering total length of 33.508 kilometers. Is the statement true or false? Okay, so this statement is true. The MMRC commissioned rights to prepare the DPR for the case study with for the Mumbai Metro Line 3, which we looked at. So the given statement is true. Moving on to the next question. The project proponent, state true or false, project proponent of water aerodrome in Andaman and Nicobar Island is the Directorate of Civil Aviation. Is the statement true or false? Okay, so the statement is true. This was mentioned in the introduction itself that the Directorate of Civil Aviation Andaman and Nicobar Island, Andaman and Nicobar Administration is the project proponent for the water aerodrome project. So the given statement is true. So A is the correct answer. Okay, so next question. State true or false. The key purpose behind the EIA report is to integrate the environmental concerns in the development activities that are addressing as the sustainable development so that it can enable integration of environmental concerns and mitigation measures and the project development and also to have any kind of future liabilities and any kind of things which happen because of Okay, next question. So, state true or false, certified laboratories are approved by Central Pollution Control Board or Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Is the statement true or false? So, the statement is true. Certified laboratories are approved by the CPCB or the MOEF MCC. So, A, true is the correct answer. Okay, so we did not receive any queries from you in this particular section. We did not receive any queries from you in the discussion forums relating to week 12's content. So, so if there are no queries, I can then close the session. Thank you so much for attending this session. And if you have any feedback, you can give it in the problem solving session feedback forms which are circulated with you. Also, the recording for this section, for the session will be made available to you as a YouTube link, and these slides will be uploaded as a PDF in the shared folder. So you can access them from the problem solving session tab. And thank you once again for attending this session.